African swine fever, a highly contagious and deadly disease to pigs, has entered the Americas for the first time since the 1970s. In late July, the Dominican Republic confirmed cases of the virus there, and it has reportedly spread to almost half of its provinces. Understanding the risk to a major pork industry in Barbados, preparations are underway in the Ministry of Agriculture to deal with any potential outbreak of the virus on the island. On this one-on-one, we discuss what farmers need to know to get themselves ready should the need arise, and the role the average Barbadian also needs to play. A very good evening to you. I'm Lisa Lord, and thank you for joining us for One-on-One. Our special guest is a Senior Veterinary Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture, Dr. Mark Trotman. Good evening, and thank you for joining.
Good evening.
Now, let's start, first of all, with what is this African swine flu?
Okay, African swine flu is a highly infectious disease of pigs, which causes multiple symptoms. It affects the entire body of the animal, and it is highly contagious and very deadly. The disease originated in Africa, as the name suggests, and for many, many years, for centuries, it really contained itself to Africa with only brief excursions into other parts of the world very briefly and quickly eradicated. So for the most part of the history of veterinary medicine, African swine fever has contained itself within Africa and a few Mediterranean islands until recently.
Because the Dominican Republic has now recorded cases.
Right. Well, Dominican Republic is the most recent of the global spread that has occurred. Around 2007, the virus started to appear in Eastern Europe. And then in 2018, it really exploded. It went into China and Southeast Asia, killing and making over 1/3 of the pig population in China die or be destroyed. Then in 2019, it went into Europe, into Belgium and Germany. The Americas have been spared it for many, many, many years until very recently when we found cases in the Dominican Republic. So it's now here in the Caribbean, here in the Americas for the first time.
And how does it differ from swine flu, which most people are familiar with?
Right, it's a completely different virus, a completely different disease. It's easy to confuse the two. There are three diseases that have similar names that are totally different. There's swine flu, which is not H1N1, which we call swine flu. Swine flu is actually an infectious influenza of swine. Then there's classical swine fever, which is another disease which is very similar to African swine fever, but much more prevalent globally. Indeed, we do have that within the Americas region and in some parts of the Caribbean. And then there's African swine fever, which is a different virus, a much more potent or virulent virus, which is what we're dealing with right now. So there are three different diseases, two of which look fairly similar, one of which is the swine flu, is completely different in its appearance and in its taxonomy.
Let's talk about appearance in terms of the symptoms. What should farmers be looking for?
Right. Depends on where you are in the world. It depends on the history of the disease. In regions such as ours, where the virus has not occurred for many, many years. It did occur briefly in Hispaniola and in Cuba in 1970 or thereabouts, but was fairly quickly eradicated. So we have not had this disease in this region since then. In this region, where we have a fairly naive population of pigs, you will probably get the peracute form, which is sudden death. So in a case like that, it will kill practically all of the animals in the swine herd. The farmer will wake up one morning and find all his pigs dead. It's just that dramatic sometimes, right? Other than that, you will see very severe symptoms. You will see very, very ill animals not eating. You'll see reddening of the ears and the stomach. You'll see bleeding from the orifices. The animal is a total mess inside. Once you open it and do a postmortem, it's all of the organs are hemorrhagic and bleeding through the blood, leaking through the blood vessels. So it's quite a severe disease and has a very potent effect on the animals. It does have a chronic form, and that's what has been maintained in Africa. After it settles down, and those animals that do die They become carriers for sometimes years, and the virus persists in the population, but you were able to maintain a population at that point in time. And so you might get very mild periodic symptoms of weakness, inappetence, not eating, those types of lameness, so perhaps it might affect the joints. So non-specific. The virus does not have a specific symptom which we can point to and say this is African swine fever. It mimics a lot of common swine diseases, which is what makes it very dangerous in that it can be very, especially if it does settle down and become more commonplace, it makes it very difficult to diagnose it. And the only way to diagnose this is by laboratory tests.
Okay. So you would have to visit the farms and do the testing?
Yes, you would have to do, well, you would respond to any reports of an animal being ill or a sudden death in a herd. You would have to take samples from different parts of the animal and submit it to laboratory analysis to see if you can actually find the virus in the tissues.
Now, in my reading, explain this for me. It is deadly for pigs. However, the pork is safe to eat.
That's actually correct. Yes. It is not a foodborne illness. It is not a zoonotic disease. No other species of animal other than wild pigs, domestic pigs and wild pigs and those related to pigs. Those are the only species that are affected by this virus. It cannot be transmitted to other other animals, and cannot be transmitted to people. Humans are safe from this virus. They will not be affected from it. While you try to remove infected animals from the food chain, you do remove infected animals from the food chain. If the virus does enter the country, the pork is still going to be safe as long as the farm is not infected. And quite frankly, even if you were to eat a piece of pork from an infected animal, I don't recommend it for other reasons, but it will not harm you because the virus does not affect people, neither from an infectious standpoint or from a food safety standpoint.
What is the Veterinary Services Department doing to help strengthen farms?
Well, we have what I call a four-pronged approach to try and deal with this. And this is part of a regional push. The Americas region has been working on developing plans for this since 2018 when the virus started to spread. And there are four components to this plan that we're trying to put in place right now. One is to make sure that we have preparedness plans in place, that we're prepared. And that entails making sure we have the diagnostic capacity to test for it, making sure we have the human resources to detect it, to go out and do surveillance on the animals, making sure that we have the necessary tools to respond to an outbreak, and that will require a multi-pronged, multi-sectoral approach. We will have to pull in a number of the various members of departments in the government to try and put together a team to respond to this. And then, so one is preparedness plans. The second one is biosecurity. Biosecurity is a term to describe protecting whether the country or the farm from the disease entering the country. So we have border biosecurity, where we strengthen our borders through collaboratively working with immigration, customs, health, port health, commerce, plant health, veterinary services, all the agencies at the border, to try and set up a net around the borders to catch the virus should it enter. And then the other part of biosecurity is farm biosecurity, working with farmers to put measures in place to keep their farms safe. Things like movement controls, foot baths on the farm, proper cleaning and disinfecting of the farms, monitoring movement into and out of the farms, monitoring the entry of animals, especially pigs. Any pigs being brought into the farm need to be isolated and monitored before they're introduced into the herd. You put, as I mentioned, foot baths as well too. Sharing of tools and equipment. The virus can hitchhike on dirty tools, so the farmers should not share tools with each other. Should not, borrow or share or borrow tools. movement of vehicles and people. So people who service farms, who travel from farm to farm, can potentially be a source of movement of transmission or spread of the virus across the country. So they need to observe certain protocols when they enter farms and when they leave farms to make sure they don't trail the virus into the farms with them. So there are a number of recommendations that we will be rolling out or are rolling out to farmers for them to put in place and to advise them on what they need to do as much as possible to keep their farm safe. So that part is biosecurity. The third pillar of the response is business continuity. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, the pork is safe. Pork the virus does not affect the meat, does not affect people. So we need to get the message out as much as possible that pork is safe. First message is that, first of all, the virus is not here in Barbados. And we will do everything we possibly can to keep it out. Even if it happens to slip in, we would have a rapid response mechanism to try and contain it and stop its spread. But those farms that are not affected can continue to operate and can continue to grow their animals and sell their pork as normal. It should not affect the industry in any way. So business continuity is another one as well too. And then the final one is to making sure that, doing what we're doing right now, have a good, strong communication plan to make sure that we are transparent, that we are proactive, that we are, we are clear in our messaging and consistent in our messaging. One of the biggest concerns we have, and we've seen it with the COVID-19 pandemic, is that there's a lot of misinformation that goes out, both inadvertent and malicious. And it's not unusual for these things to happen anytime there's any national disaster or pandemic or epidemic such as this one. So we need to keep our eye on the ball on this one and make sure that we can address any misconceptions, any rumors, false rumors, or any deliberate fake news that might come out as a result of it. We already had one report that the virus was in Jamaica shortly after the diagnosis was in Dominican Republic. That's absolutely false. So we need to make sure that we keep an eye on social media, on the news media, on the print media, on the moral road, so to speak, to make sure that we can address those before they become out of control.
Now, you mentioned the tools in terms of testing. Does your department have the capacity to deal with this?
We are developing the capacity to deal with it. We are strengthening our veterinary services laboratory. We do have some limited capacity, but we have been given authorization to attain the tools we need. The cabinet is very, very supportive of our efforts to get things in place, and I have no doubt. We have the expertise on island. We don't have to bring in the expertise. We have a lot of very qualified, very competent technologists on the island. We have a laboratory which is well facilitated. It's just a few pieces of equipment and a few kits, diagnostic kits that we need to get in. We also have the collaboration of the international agencies, the OIE, the FAO, even the USDA and ICA, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. All of them are on board. And they are communicating with each other, and they're communicating with us, and they're looking at what resources are needed across the Caribbean and the Americas in general to make sure that they can assist us in sourcing all of the tools that we need to be able to address this problem.
Now, just like COVID, it sounds as though you're going to rely a lot on honesty. You need farmers to be honest and say, I have some pigs on my farm that are not well.
Vaccines have both protected and kept children healthy from serious illnesses such as whooping cough, measles, crippling diseases like polio, and others. Vaccines help your immune system to do its job better and faster, and that protects you from serious disease. Like a good security guard, the immune system is always on patrol in your body, looking for invading germs. When it comes across a germ, it begins releasing antibodies to fight that germ. These antibodies work to attack, weaken, and destroy the germ. The COVID-19 vaccine is no different. It will work to help your immune system fight COVID effectively. All vaccines go through strict trials before they are approved for use in the population. Even after the COVID-19 vaccines are approved for use in the general population, monitoring for safety continues. Vaccines are safe, and they work.
This message has been brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and the Pan American Health Organization.
Everything comes at a cost. And these days, no one profits from the loss, like when a child is forced to trade school day socialization for screen time study, when a disease decides to disrupt our daily routine, and suddenly every one of us is coming undone, losing loved ones' lives and livelihoods, breath and breadwinners, families and festivals and freedoms. God, we feel like it's too much hassle to be human. We will always remember the years the earth spun quieter, but Mother Nature showed us how the simple act of standing still can wage war on an illness. So may we remember how to be our own army, how it takes cooperation for a community to build immunity, how unity can nurse us back to normalcy. Why stop at one family when we could save all?
Now, just like COVID, it sounds as though you're going to rely a lot on honesty. You need farmers to be honest and say, I have some pigs on my farm that are not well.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. We need to make sure we establish a good, strong rapport with the farmers. We already do have that, but we need to strengthen that. So we are actually getting additional resources, human resources, to roll out a more aggressive one-on-one campaign, or one-on-one dialogue with farmers, so that they know who to contact, what to look for. We will be doing visits on a regular basis to just kind of touch base with them. So, getting in contact with farmers are critical, because the faster we can detect it, the faster we can address it. This disease, if it gets out of control, is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to contain. There are no vaccines for this virus. There's no treatment for this virus. So the only way that we can handle this virus, if it enters, is eradication. Sounds brutal, but we have to depopulate. That's a very nice word to say, that we have to kill all the animals on the farm and dispose of them very quickly. There is a mechanism for the farmers to be compensated if we have to destroy the animals in the context of this disease. So farmers need not be worried about loss of livelihood if they do. So that's an incentive to report it. You get horror stories in countries where they don't have that mechanism, where farmers will try to hide because they worry that if they report it, they will lose their livelihood. Their animals will be killed, and their animals have to be killed. So we have to have a mechanism in place to compensate the farmers if we do it in the context of the disease. And that's why it's important to establish that rapport with farmers, so we know exactly what stock they have, what they have on the farm, so we can adequately compensate them if we have to do so. So all of these have been thought of. All these things have been, we haven't yet started. We're now getting into this thing. This disease only occurred on the 29th of July. And although we have been in preparation stage for quite some time, we're now trying to roll out the plans. We're now trying to gather the resources to respond to it. We have time, we hope, because the disease so far since the 29th, it hasn't left the island of Hispaniola yet. So we are working assiduously to try and get those plans in place. So those are the types of things that we're trying to put in place now.
And your services are free?
To livestock animals, our services are free.
Yes. So I don't have to worry as a farmer. I'm calling you to come to my farm, and it's an expense.
We will not charge for it. Now, if we use private veterinarians, they will charge a consultation fee, and that's normal, right? But laboratory fees, extension fees, advice to farmers, all the work that we do interacting with them is from the veterinary services standpoint is free of cost to livestock.
You mentioned biosecurity earlier.
Yes.
In terms of, and this relates as well to our borders. What mechanisms are in place to strengthen our borders from products coming in? Because it doesn't only spread from live pigs, but it goes to cooked and frozen products as well.
Yes, in fact, that is the most common way that the virus travels internationally, not through live pigs. As you can imagine, live pigs don't travel internationally a lot, right? And when they do, they travel so under very strict conditions. And we do have strict protocols to monitor and to regulate the importation of live animals. We also have strict protocols for the importation of animal products into the country. Those of you who have traveled and wanted to bring a piece of meat back from the country will know they have to come to my office to get a permit to get it back in. There's a reason for that, not just a money maker for the government, but we keep a very close eye on diseases all over the world. And we monitor that, and so we adjust our requirements depending on the country and adjust them accordingly, so that you might find from time to time we will have to put a restriction on the importation of a certain commodity into the country. So that's one mechanism we use now, our permitting system. It's not foolproof, and we know that there are a number of people who do bring product into the country that don't declare it or don't get a permit for it. So we need to strengthen that aspect of it, where we can detect or pick up people who maybe not deliberately but are inadvertently, bringing in, maybe because of lack of knowledge, they're bringing in a piece of, a lot of people like to bring the bacon or a piece of ham or some sausages with them. Those are really a no-no, because this virus does survive smoking and pickling and curing. It will survive those types of treatments. So working collaboratively with customs, with all of the border agencies, so that they're aware of the risks and on the lookout for any possible inadvertent or deliberate attempts to bring pork products into the country, is another mechanism that we will put in place, or we have put in place, to protect the borders from the entry. And the other mechanism, another way that the virus can enter the country, is through international garbage, kitchen waste from ships and kitchen waste from airplanes. Because as I said, the virus does not affect people, so it's perfectly possible that the same pork or the same salami or ham that is served on a vessel, whether it be a ship or a yacht or a plane, can contain the virus, right? So we need to have a way of making sure that all international garbage that enters the country is appropriately handled, so it doesn't get into the country and potentially spread from there.
So your department is working with a lot of different agencies, clearly.
Yes, we will be. We have been and will continue to be working with a lot of different agencies to make sure that we all have the same goal in mind and we're all looking for the same thing.
One of the products that we import a lot of on an annual basis is pigtails. Bajans love pigtails, and they're scarce on our shelves at the moment. Are we having a shortage? A problem with supply?
Actually, yes. Pigtail is one of those commodities that African swine fever can be transmitted through. And there is currently an outbreak of African swine fever in Germany, which is the country where most of our pigtail is sourced from. So, mea culpa, I am the one who has had to put a restriction in place to prevent the importation of pigtail and other pork and pork products from Germany for the time being. We're monitoring it very closely, and as soon as we can raise the ban, we will do so.
So Bajans might be without pigtail for a little bit?
Well, that depends on how the disease exists and progresses in Germany, but I'm hoping not as long as most of us, will be concerned about, but there is a possibility that they'll be in place for a little while.
But in relation now to, let's say, heaven forbid, and the virus does reach our shores, it is fairly easy to get rid of with most commercial disinfectants, including bleach.
Yes, bleach, and most of the over-the-counter disinfectants. There are disinfectants specifically for use on farms that you can get from the farm supply stores. I would recommend those more so than going to the supermarket and buying Discipline or Lysol, because they're produced in bulk, and you'll need to use a lot of disinfectant on the farm to make sure that you have proper disinfectant capacity. One of the things that we need to enforce with farmers is that they install foot baths, so that anybody coming into the farm dip their feet in a disinfectant solution to prevent the virus from being traipsed into the farm. A foot bath can simply be a basin or a wash tab. Some farms have little depressions near the doors that they're built in place, that they put bleach solution or disinfectant solution in. And so the most common part of your person that would have the virus is on your shoes, the soles of your shoes, because that's where you come right into contact with potentially contaminated stuff. So that's the first thing. The other thing that farmers should recommend, and especially for themselves and any farm workers, is that they don't leave the farm in their farm clothes. They enter the farm, they change into farm clothes there, they do their work, and they change back into their street clothes and then leave the farm. Because especially if they're dealing with pigs, they will get splattered on the clothes and so on when they're hosing down or handling or feeding. And you don't want to take that item of clothing out of the farm, because you're then taking it into other jurisdictions. So change your clothes before you go into the farm. Obviously, that's not feasible for people who have to visit farms. And they also present a risk, but certainly the foot baths is one of them.
The manner in which pigs are fed, that's also a concern for you?
Not so much the manner that we're fed. We are concerned about the animal feed, because pig feed could potentially be, depending on how you source the feed, that could potentially be a source of the virus. The manner in which feed is distributed to the farms could be a risk. And so feed vehicles that are moving from farm to farm, taking bags of feed or taking bulk feed for silos, can potentially take the virus from farm to farm. So that's where the risk is. The actual feed transporters could be a very big risk where that's concerned.
I'm glad you mentioned transporters. In terms of the way that the pigs are actually transported, is that also an issue?
Yes, it is. Any vehicle that transports live pigs or supplies for pigs that's going to and from a pig farm are risk factors. People who visit farms on a regular basis are risk factors. Veterinarians, people like myself, if we are going from farm to farm, we need to take certain precautions, especially as veterinarians are specifically going to see sick animals or to advise on animal health. So they are especially at risk of if they don't, veterinarians are trained to do this and they need to follow proper protocols. But if they don't, then they do serve as a major risk factor in moving the virus from one place to another. Inspectors, farm inspectors, health inspectors, feed delivery people, all of those people are, potential buyers that want to go on farm gate and look at pigs. They are major risk factors for transmission, not necessarily for the initial introduction of the virus into the country or into a farm, but movement of the virus, spread of the virus once it enters and spreads across the country.
Is your department satisfied, and this not only pertains to pigs, but generally livestock across the island, in terms of how the farms operate?
It's very varied. We have some fantastic farms who do excellent work. They follow good agricultural practices. They're very sensitive to the needs of their pigs and properly take care of their pigs. Those are the commercial farms. We also do have a number of backyard farms, and those are really, really the ones at risk. The cases in the Dominican Republic are mostly in backyard farms. For a number of reasons. Of course, backyard farmers, one who has maybe a pen with a couple of pigs in it, or hobbyist farmers, they're not as au fait with proper husbandry practices. They just, maybe over the generations, their family has always raised pigs in the backyard, or some enthusiast who decides he wants to get into the market or he likes working pigs. So they're not really as well, I don't want to use the word educated, but exposed to proper farming practices. And so they were the ones that are likely to let their guards down, not necessarily have proper biosecurity measures. Not, people are moving in and out of the farms. Visitors are coming to the farms all the time. Where we see introduction of African swine fever into countries, especially countries in this part of the world or in Southeast Asia, it is usually in small backyard farms where is the point of entry. The other risk factor for small backyard farms, why they are very vulnerable to the virus, is that a lot of them often feed their pigs swill or table scraps, or gatherings from processing plants. And that's understandable because, feed prices are very, very high nowadays, and it's expensive to feed a pig commercial food. Right? Especially if you're doing it on a hobbyist basis or for a subsistence purposes. So it's very tempting to scrape a bucket off the table scraps in the bucket, throw the morning's sausages in there, throw a ham sandwich inside there, gather up stuff when you go out. I can give this to my pigs, and I will, if you go to a function or something, and collect it in a bucket and then just throw it into the trough for the pigs and treat it. And that is one of the most risky points of entry for the African swine fever, for any pig disease, quite frankly. So first and foremost, we highly recommend not feeding pigs swill, fresh swill and cooked swill. Secondly, if you have to, do not feed them anything with pork. And thirdly, cook it. Heat cook the swill. If you can do that, if you have no choice and you really need to do something like that, make sure you thoroughly cook whatever it is. Whatever, just cook it. Boil it up or put it over a fire. Make sure it's thoroughly cooked. That will deactivate. While the virus does survive in partially cooked or cured or smoked, it will not survive in thoroughly cooked pork, right? So thoroughly cook the meat, the swill. I don't like to recommend that but I know that some people really can have no option and have to do that. So if you have to feed swill to your pigs, make sure it is properly cooked. Make sure it doesn't have any pork in it. Those are the pieces of advice I would give to small farmers who need to find some alternative to bag feed for their pigs.
So regarding the African swine fever, you will be increasing your resources, monitoring and strengthening borders and farmers, and preparing, if heaven forbid, we should have a case.
For the past year, because of the pandemic, I had to take most of my classes online. I would rather be at school. I miss interacting with my teachers and friends. I want to be vaccinated. Getting vaccinated can help protect me, my teachers, friends, and family from COVID-19. I also understand that when vaccinated, I must continue to keep my guard up by washing my hands with soap and water frequently, wearing my mask properly, by covering my nose and mouth, and avoiding crowds. Vaccines are safe and they work.
This message has been brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and the Pan American Health Organization.
Let me begin preparations. It's hurricane season. Let me sit down and reason. Let me secure a nation. Know your shelters, Bajan. Help out one another, get separation. Develop emergency community plans so that we could function. Remove outdoor objects. Make sure that you went to the ATM. Stock up with water. Make sure you clean the guttering, Lord. What about canned food? Make sure you got some stock up in your room. Make sure you prop up the paling and tie down the roof. Let me start to prepare real soon. Let me begin preparations. It's hurricane season. Let me sit down and reason. Let me secure a nation. Know your shelters, Bajan. Help out one another, get separation. Develop emergency community plans so that we could function.
So regarding the African swine fever,
Swine fever.
you will be increasing your resources, monitoring and strengthening borders and farmers,
Yes.
and preparing, if heaven forbid, we should have a case.
Yes, we will be on the lookout. We have the backing of the major international organizations. They're fully on board. The region, CARICOM Chief Veterinary Officers is on board. We have been doing a lot of meeting, a lot of planning. The day that the Dominican Republic announced the outbreak, the very next day, the World Organization for Animal Health in the region called a meeting of all chief veterinary officers of the region and started to roll out their plans and present their advice, started to gather information on what countries needed in order to resource them properly to address the problem. So the entire region is on high alert. They are trying to come up with resources that they can make available. We don't know what they are yet. I think they're still trying to see where they can find the funds to assist countries. I don't think we as a country, Barbados, will wait on that. We have already received approval from Cabinet to go ahead and make sure that we are properly prepared to deal with this, right? And I am confident that within the next couple of weeks or so, we will have a robust program on board to keep the virus out first and to be prepared to rapidly diagnose it and respond quickly should it enter the country.
Now, Dr. Trotman, you are head of the Veterinary Services Department, and I want to shed a little light now on the work your department does.
Sure.
It's a lot more than just issuing permits for agents to bringing their ham and sausages. Tell us a little bit about the work of your department.
That is our public face. Most people know us as the meat permit people,
yes,
or the people who go to issue export certificates for dogs going overseas. But we do a lot more. That is actually the least of the work that we do. It's the most time consuming, maybe. It's the least of the work that we do. But our responsibility is to keep the animal population of this country healthy, and to prevent diseases from entering the country that could harm not only the animals but people. So we talk about animal health and veterinary public health, which is not only diseases of animals but diseases of animals that can affect people. All right. So we do a lot of surveillance. We look for various diseases like highly pathogenic avian influenza, which was a big deal about 10 years ago. That virus is still around in parts of the world, so we can't drop our guard on that. So we sample and test for outbreaks of that disease, plus other bird diseases as well. Of course, you know that we have a very strong poultry industry on the island, and protecting it is one of our number one priorities. So surveillance for diseases and control mechanisms for diseases. We have a program where we test regularly for tuberculosis in cattle to make sure that there's no TB on the island. There's no TB in Barbados. We've been able to keep TB out of the country since the 1970s, right? So every year we subcontract private veterinarians to go to dairy farms to test them. We bring in the tuberculin and provide it free of cost. So it's a subsidized program. So farmers are tested for livestock, dairy animals, both goats and cattle are tested every year for tuberculosis to make sure that we don't have that disease in the country. Surveillance for the tropical bont tick, which is a dangerous tick which carries some very nasty little bugs inside of it. So we eradicated that tick a few years ago, so we continue surveillance to make sure it doesn't crop back up again. For most species of animals, we have a surveillance program of some sort, monitoring for outbreaks of diseases of importance to the country. So farm visits, samples, slaughterhouse sampling, laboratory submissions from veterinarians, to keep a finger on the pulse of the country's animal health is what our primary responsibility. We regulate the importation of all animals and animal products, commercially and personal. So we negotiate and work with other countries that want to export product to Barbados. If necessary, we will actually send a team to that country to look at their animal health and their veterinary public health systems. We look at their slaughterhouses, we look at their processing plants, we look at their regulations and their laws, and determine whether they are at a standard that's acceptable so that the products that they export to Barbados are safe to eat and also do not bring in diseases that could be transmitted to our animal population. So those are a few of the things that we do every day, routinely, as part of the Veterinary Services responsive mandate.
Now, legal importation is never really an issue because you go through the correct channels. However, how big of an issue is the illegal importation of meats and other products and animals?
Most people are compliant, and people who, I think that the public, the traveling public are well aware that they need to get permits to bring meat into the country. We do get situations from time to time where people either are not aware of it or they deliberately decide that they will sneak in something that's not on their permit. So that is one loophole or one hole in the armor that we know exists. Hence the need for more vigilance. But it is the informal imports that are the biggest risk. As you quite rightly said, we have a very good, strong program of permitting, and all of the importers are very compliant. They know very well what they have to do. We have a very good rapport with them. We discuss things with them, and they come to us and say, okay, I want to bring this product in from such and such. And then we do our risk analysis, we do our due diligence and see what is necessary, what the conditions are. Can you bring it in? Under what conditions can you bring this product in or not? So yes, you're right. I don't like to say illegal, although it is illegal, the informal importation is a risk factor. There's always the risk, and we have intercepted some fishing vessels who decide that they want to bring more than just fish with their in their cargo. Mainly birds. Those are some of the things that we see. I don't think I've ever seen a pig come in on a fishing vessel, but certainly we've seen birds, intercepted vessels with birds on it that have come in from neighboring countries. So those, the informal importation is our biggest risk factor right now.
Now, over the years since you've been in the profession, are you concerned at the level of diseases that are affecting animals that could possibly then be transferred to humans?
It's increasing. There is we call them emerging diseases, and COVID-19 is one of them. About 70% of the new diseases globally diagnosed are of animal origin. COVID-19 is one. There was a concern back in early 2000s that highly pathogenic avian influenza, it did have a zoonotic component. Some people were affected. Luckily, it did not turn into a pandemic. But that's another zoonotic disease and the influenzas, which do crop up from time to time, always have the potential in animals. And there are influenza species and viruses in practically all animal species. There's, as we talked about swine influenza, there's equine influenza, there's canine influenza, there's avian influenza. So most of the domestic animals have a form of influenza, and they're all related to the flu we call influenza. They're the same virus, just different variations of it. And so any one of those viruses can at some point in time mutate and jump species and become a human disease. As the population starts to expand and go into areas that are virgin areas, the risk of animal diseases jumping from animals to people becomes greater. Ebola is a zoonotic disease, right? That came out of Africa. Marburg virus is a zoonotic disease. A lot of these scary diseases that you hear about from time to time often come from animals. So yes, I am worried about it. And that's where the human-animal interface starts to really become I don't know what the description is, a primordial soup, a petri dish, I guess would be the best way to say, of human infection, where we interact with these novel species of animals or go into areas where people don't normally go into. You start to get the potential for these jumps to occur. And it is occurring, almost every other year or so we hear a case of another disease that's coming up. Emerging diseases are the new, the new pandemic of that's going on right now.
And Prime Minister Motley often refers to what she calls as the slow-moving pandemic, the antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah.
However, are you seeing that? Is it harder to treat animals that are
Yes,
getting
very
sick?
much so. Very much so. We are seeing it. It's not theoretical. It's happening in Barbados. That's another major area that we're involved in, working with the Ministry of Health. The Prime Minister, of course, has this is the chair of this global leaders group, which is, and she's certainly on board with this, and she is pushing this heavily. What she calls the slow-moving pandemic. It's something that we have recognized has been going on for more than a decade. We started to see signs of this thing happening due to the inappropriate use of antibiotics. So, and it happens in both humans and in animals. Farmers are administering antibiotics, and veterinarians, doctors, are administering antibiotics indiscriminately because we felt this was such a wonderful tool. The antibiotic is only about a little over a century old. It's just so amazing that what we considered to be the discovery of the century in the 20th century, the discovery of penicillin, that saved so many lives in world wars. Infection used to be the main cause of death in wars. In the developing world, antibiotics are truly a lifesaver, both in human medicine and in veterinary medicine. But we've abused it. And every year we've had to come up with a new generation of antibiotics because the old generation becomes resistant. And we are now getting to the point where we've run out of antibiotics. The research is not producing we're just producing variations of the same antibiotic. We're not getting novel antibiotics. And these antibiotics are starting to develop resistance. So common infections are becoming more and more difficult to treat. Our veterinary laboratory does an AMR survey. We do a culture and sensitivity. When we collect samples, or when samples are submitted from infections, our microbiologists not only culture to find out what the bacteria is, but they do a sensitivity to see what antibiotics the bacteria are sensitive to. And we are collecting that data, and we're seeing more and more that some of the antibiotics that we normally assumed would work are not working. We get these resistant infections. And once you get a resistant infection, you've lost your arsenal. You've lost the ability to treat it. So it really is a major concern. It really is a pandemic of resistance. That is another area that we really, we've been doing this for quite some time, but we've really stepped up on that. And it will become more and more part of our program to contribute to the understanding of how much we have in terms of development of resistance to bacteria in the country, what antibiotics are becoming more and more difficult to use. We're doing that survey, and we'll be doing a lot more outreach on the farms to try and find some alternative methods to treatments or alternative prevention control methods to minimize the use of antibiotics as much as possible.
And sticking on that point about your outreach to the farmers, you will be going out to the farmers to sensitize them about the African swine fever?
We will be doing two things. We will be meeting with the farmers, right, as groups. As a matter of fact, we already have one meeting. Well, yesterday was a meeting we had with some, but we were doing more direct targeting meeting with the farmers. Some via Zoom, some via face-to-face. But we will also be once we get the resources, we will also be rolling out farm visits. I do have an officer who is doing a census right now to find out where the pig farms are, how many pigs they have. And I urge pig farmers to collaborate with that. So we need to get a handle on where the pigs are so we can map it. We have some great GIS tools, geographical information system tools, that we can utilize to map where the farms are, and that way we can see what farms are going to be at risk for entry, what farms are going to be at risk for spread. We can model outbreaks and see where the virus can go if it enters one point. So we have some wonderful tools we can use to map it, but we can only do that if we know where the farms are and how many pigs are in each farm. So those are some of the tools that we will be using during the preparedness stage to make sure that if we do have an outbreak, in this farm, we know that this farm is at risk and this farm is at risk, so we make sure we pay more attention to
And
those
you can
farms.
isolate those.
Yeah, sort of like contact tracing.
Right. Well, Dr. Trotman, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us about African swine fever and what farmers can do to get prepared.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. That was Dr. Mark Trotman, the Senior Veterinary Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture, who heads the Veterinary Services Department. I am Lisa Lord, and this was One on One.